Okay, so here is our information if you want to tweet anything about the presentation. Crowdfunding webinar NPF, and there is my information, Philcom SRQ, and Nonprofits First. This is me, so that you know who you're talking with today, who's giving you the information. Tracy Vanderneck, like I said, president of Philcom. I've been in fundraising and business development for over 20 years. I have a Master of Science in Management with a concentration in nonprofit leadership, a graduate certificate in teaching and learning, and I am a certified fundraising executive. I think I'm on my third round of renewing my CFRE, so a few more years and I'll be able to go for the ACFRE. I've worked with such organizations as American Red Cross, a small private college preparatory school, a national healthcare organization, and different foundations. I've also been on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals for the last 7 years, and I'm a mentor in the mentoring program. I also work with DonorPath, which is a part now of Network for Good, and I do a blog for them. And like you can see on there, sometimes presentations can get a little bit long and boring, so I throw in random pictures of my dogs just to keep everybody entertained. And that is Dharma, by the way. Okay, so let's talk about what crowdfunding is. I'm going to assume that most of the people listening here are nonprofit professionals and that you either are on the board of a nonprofit, are a CEO, or work in the fundraising or development department. So we, as nonprofit professionals, tend to do standard fundraising over time, like events or direct mail or one-to-one asks. Crowdfunding is the practice of raising monetary contributions from a large number of people as opposed to just the people that are in your sphere of influence that you already know. Basically, with crowdfunding, somebody has a great idea. They go online. Crowdfunding is almost 100% online. They promote the idea online, and other people decide if it's something they want to invest in. Now, there are different kinds of crowdfunding. You've probably heard of different things like people coming up with ideas for something that they want to create, or a friend that they want to help. There's also what we call micro-lending. If anybody's heard of kiva.org, it's a great organization that I sometimes donate to because you can invest in them with as little as $25. And you go onto their site and choose somebody who is being entrepreneurial and wants to purchase or get a loan for something that will help them. For example, a woman, a single mom in Afghanistan who wants to purchase a sheep so that she can use the wool to, make and sell her wares in the market. So that's kind of what micro lending is. It's picking a certain project, helping somebody get going with it, and then they pay it back. That was just a brief description, but what we're going to focus on is non-lending forms of crowdfunding, where it's strictly you giving them money. So here are a few examples of crowdfunding. I want to make a movie and I need to take a year off of work to do it. And I think that other people will be interested in that movie, so I put information online and ask them to fund up front the money that I need to do that. Another type of crowdfunding is one that probably many of you have seen if you are at all on Facebook or Twitter, that somebody's friend or relative is sick or in the hospital, or something has happened to one of their kids, and the person, your Facebook friend, is so moved by the ordeal that the other person is going through that they put up a crowdfunding site to raise money to help them with things like medical bills or to pay bills for time that they lost at work. So that is basically individually based. It's a personal gift from you to them. Now, the third type of crowdfunding is potentially charity-based, where there's a disaster somewhere in the world and I want to give to a charity to help alleviate whatever suffering that disaster caused. An example might be a tsunami in Japan or flooding in the Midwest in the United States. But the crowdfunding sites can either be run by an individual or by a charity who is helping or wants to help in that area. So the benefits of crowdfunding are, there's a number of benefits. They can reach more areas than we can with standard traditional fundraising. With traditional fundraising, if we have a project that we want to fund, we either, like I said before, send out a direct mail piece or hold an event or ask people to come tour our facility so that we can talk to them about it. The benefits of crowdfunding are that because it is all based online and almost all of it is conducted through social media and people telling people in a very organic, grassroots type of way, the reach is much further and wider than it would be with our standard fundraising efforts. One of the great things about crowdfunding is it builds excitement. If people are compelled by a story that they hear and they're sitting in their living room on a Sunday afternoon and they read a story and it just makes them feel really compelled to help, they can invest in that and then watch how that crowdfunding project comes to fruition and feel good about being part of it. It's also very easy to give. You can do it in a couple of minutes online, where sometimes with traditional nonprofit fundraising, it's a more laborious process of building relationships. Another benefit of crowdfunding is that it works well for project-specific appeals. I've worked with an organization as I'm a consultant that works with small to mid-sized nonprofits, and I've worked with organizations who want to participate in crowdfunding, but who maybe potentially misunderstand the right type of project to include on a crowdfunding project. So they will put, for example, our budget for this year is $1 million. So we need to raise $1 million so that we can, help the animals in our shelter, or so that we can deliver elder care in our area. The problem with that is there's no real time frame because it is, your yearly budget. So there's no excitement and deadline that people are trying to reach. And because it's so broad, that money would be paying for operations or transportation or insurance or any of those not quite as exciting or interesting things. So the best way to do crowdfunding is to pick a project. For example, if your organization has found a veteran who needs ramps installed in his house, but for whatever reason he does not qualify for other disabled veteran programs finances. So you could start a crowdfunding campaign to raise the couple $1,000s that it might take to rework the areas of his home. Because they'll feel compelled by his story. It's a short-term project, and they can see it through to fruition. People want to be able to see the end result of their efforts. Now, one of the things that we have to deal with as nonprofit professionals is determining what crowdfunding sites are valid and which sites are appropriate for the specific type of project that we want to do. So as you can see on this page, that when I Googled crowdfunding sites on that particular day, it came up with over 756,000 results. So it does make sense for us as nonprofit professionals to do a little bit of due diligence to determine which site is most appropriate for our project. So crowdfunding sites, as I mentioned a little bit ago, fall into a couple different categories. Some are product-based, like the person that wanted to create a movie, and some are personal gifts, like if you wanted to help your neighbor. Now, you should always research these sites in terms of what type of percent fee is taken out and other fine print items. For example, some sites will offer you the option of passing along site fees to the donor. Some charge a low percent so that it might be close to or as good as the credit card fees that you pay to your own vendor, around 2 or 3%. A lot of times, though, it's going to be from 6 all the way to up as far as 10%, which may be one you want to double check on before you choose that option. Now, the reason for this is it's not just a credit card processing fee. It's basically because that vendor is handling everything for you. You don't have to host the site. You don't have to necessarily find your own audience there. Once your project is up on that site, it can be seen by anyone, the millions of different people in their networks. So they are definitely offering you services above and beyond just a plain credit card processing fee. So you do want to think about that while you're choosing your platform. Now, a couple of just the top sites that people are usually familiar with. IndieGoGo is one of them. The IndieGoGo started for things like indie or independent films. So that would be the place where if you had a project you wanted to do a documentary that was going to take you a year to film, this would probably be one that you would look at doing. Now, in looking at their site, they are also launching into the donation space. So they may now be a viable option for fundraising for nonprofit organizations. Now, this is an example of a donation page on IndieGoGo. So, obviously they are in nonprofits, they are working with organizations right now. So if you look at this, it is a project for a elephant sanctuary in eastern Cambodia. It's definitely something that, you would not necessarily have access to in your normal everyday life, but because of crowdfunding through social media, you do have access to give to that elephant sanctuary if you would like. So that is IndieGoGo. The next option is Kickstarter. Kickstarter is almost exclusively known for projects. Kickstarter is actually the first crowdfunding site that I ever gave a gift to. It was several years ago a movie called Bridegroom, and they very quickly raised the money to create the movie called Bridegroom, but they were also, unfortunately, a case study in the fact that crowdfunding has limited accountability. All of us who donated to it we were sent an email that said we would, get updates periodically as the movie progressed, as the production progressed. Expecting that to be in over months, and it turned out to be over several years. And bridegroom, unfortunately, made an example of a number of things not to do. They didn't keep their donors up on what was happening with the movie as much as they could have. So most people felt after they donated that it was sort of, dropped into a hole and they weren't connected with it anymore. And when you have to wait a couple of years to see something that you donated, maybe, $25 or $100 to come to fruition, it doesn't have as much impact often on the donor. Now we look at sites like GoFundMe. These are almost exclusively for personal gifts and charity donations. You won't often find, that I'm aware of, projects like, movies or anything like that, people that want to go on, personal trips to Italy to learn to paint. They won't often, as often be on GoFundMe as they would on some of the other sites. The one thing that all of these sites do have in common is limited accountability to the person who is investing in the project. And the example we'll use, we'll go back to this elephant, and we'll zoom in on him a little bit. Taking a look at this page on IndieGoGo, is there anything that tells us that this is a legitimate project? It tells us, it's a donation page. You can donate to help us rescue more elephants to live in our sanctuary in eastern Cambodia. It has what the amount that they want to raise. It has a neat little, bubble from the elephant, but there is not anything on here that tells us that this is a legitimate charity. There is no contact information. There is no website information. And there is no, if this area requires registration for nonprofit solicitation, there's no information about that on it. So looking at this, it could in fact be, an absolutely legitimate project helping elephants in Cambodia, but it could also be a hacker sitting in their apartment in New Jersey, just putting up projects so that they can receive basically donations. Not to say that that's true, but unfortunately there are many instances of crowdfunding sites being funneled to places that the donors don't necessarily expect it to be. Now this was, let's see, August of 2016. So, a few months ago now. People might remember it was a big story in the news. It was on, CNN a couple mornings in a row about a homeless teenager or young adult in Georgia who was walking or riding his bike for miles to get to college, to go to classes. People responded with great emotion to him. This lady that you see in the picture found out about his story. She started a crowdfunding site for him to raise money for him to be able to have a home and get to school more easily. Now, some of the issues that came up with this. First, you'll see her name, Tracy Blaney. She set up a GoFundMe account. She wanted to collect funds for, the man's name is Barley's living expenses. It made national news. Anytime a crowdfunding project hits the news, as opposed to just, going from friend to friend, it's going to get a reaction. It's going to get more donations. And if you happen to catch the eye of George Takei or somebody like him and they post information about your crowdfunding, then you can pretty much guarantee that people are going to jump in and donate to this cause. Now, where the issue comes in with this particular project is that it was just a well-meaning, I believe she was a self-described soccer mom, wanting to raise money for this young man, So she did so, and the outpouring was incredible. It came out to $184,000 at that time. But then she decided she wanted to put the money in a trust so that the young man would have the money sort of protected for him to be able to have living expenses and college expenses. Well, the problem with that is none of that was disclosed in her GoFundMe page. That was not set up ahead of time. There were no legal parameters set up to what she was doing. I think she was looking for a certain amount of money and ended up getting so much more that she then said, "Oh, we really need to put some safeguards in place so that this young man is able to use this money for what people intended it to be." Each of them hired a lawyer. The young man did not want the money in a trust. She did. The lawyers ended up, working it out. No money was dispensed for a while. Everything was frozen, and they kind of had to battle it out. And then, in the news, stories came out about, was he really homeless, and did she have the whole story before she raised money for him? Now, this is the perfect example of the fact that crowdfunding just really doesn't have any inherent accountability to the people that give, because when she put up that site, there was nothing that said, that there were going to be any regulations or restrictions. She was just going to hand that money over to him. And the donors, you're basically trusting. You're placing your trust in somebody that you've never met, handing them money and trusting them to give it or spend it on. Give it to who or spend it on what they said they were going to do. So because, crowdfunding is, not always a super exciting thing. Here's another picture of Dharma, totally asleep. So I am hoping that at this point in the presentation, you guys are not looking like Dharma. Hopefully everybody's still engaged here. So now let's take a closer look at nonprofit crowdfunding specifically. Up to this point, we have been looking at different projects and gifts to individuals. Let's take it down to specifically to nonprofits. Now, if we are to look at crowdfunding in the terms that we look at our standard fundraising practices, there's a couple things that we want to evaluate. One is, an example is that I think probably every nonprofit has events, whether you have a ton of events or just one or two a year, and whether you love them or they're the bane of your existence because they have the highest cost to raise a dollar of any method of fundraising. Everybody has the same trouble or the same opportunity to try to convert event attendees into loyal donors. A lot of times people will come to your event because their friend bought a table and invited them to fill up the table. Maybe the first they've heard of your organization, or your mission is not particularly close to their heart, so they just attend to be a part of the social function. And then it is your job as a development professional for that or the nonprofit to try to build a relationship with them and bring those people into the inner circle of your organization. That is not always easy, and most nonprofits will tell you that that is the area where they feel like they are the least effective in converting event attendees into loyal donors. Another potential downside of crowdfunding we've already sort of talked about is the fraud potential, is the fact that crowdfunding thus far on these sites and through social media is not terribly regulated, where most of us, depending on what state we live in, we have numerous regulations by which we have to adhere to in order to be able to keep our 501c3 status and to be able to keep our fundraising registrations intact. Because none of those safeguards are in place for crowdfunding, it does create an opportunity for fraud. and not a lot of help on the back end if there turns out to be fraud. There is not a lot of ways that people can address the problem after the fact. The other thing is gift tracking snares. Gift tracking, as we all know, can be difficult enough trying to figure out where, if a check came in, was it because somebody asked the person directly? Was it because they went to an event? Was it because they got a direct mail piece? Was it because they talked to somebody that you've never heard of and just sent it? The same can be true of crowdfunding, especially in the fact that people are sometimes giving to crowdfunding because their friends care about that site. So you may not have information on that donor at all, and you may not get it through that crowdfunding site. You may get their donation, but they have the opportunity to mask their information to the charity. So you are getting gifts, and that is a wonderful thing, but you may not be able to get the information to build on a relationship with that person. And there are probably other potential downsides that aren't on here, but it makes sense for us as nonprofit professionals to sit and kind of think through those ahead of time so that we know what to avoid and how to not get into any sticky situations. Now, I think probably most of us have heard, a board member or another staff person or, anybody well-meaning volunteer say, we should do crowdfunding. It totally works. It's great. Not really realizing that it isn't always the right thing for a certain project. But here, this, I think, is what we would all like to have as a successful crowdfunding campaign. Okay, so you can see here we go. You can see, that is a good example of a feel-good video-based crowdfunding campaign. And how you present a project on a crowdfunding site like GoFundMe is very important. Just like anything else, the marketing or the sales aspect of it, people want to see the good things that can come from their personal investment. And, one like that, where it's kids in Africa, these solar backpacks make it possible for them to achieve an educational level that they may not have otherwise. It was very tangible. It had a deadline, and I believe it said they surpassed their goals. So that is what we would all love to have as our crowdfunding scenario for our organization. Now, for me, I live in Florida, and one of the biggest crowdfunding projects that most of us dealt with or have heard about in Florida in the last several years is the crowdfunding response on GoFundMe to the terror attack at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Here is a picture of the Pulse nightclub's GoFundMe page. And this is before the end. I do believe that they ended up raising more than that. In my research about how this campaign went, I talked to Ida Escamani, who at the time was the development director for Equality Florida. And she let us know that this was the fastest GoFundMe page to reach $1 million and the first to reach $2 million. And at that time, at least, it was the largest GoFundMe campaign in history. And the reason for that is exactly what we talked about earlier, is it had emotional appeal to a certain group of people, as well as to a wider compassionate audience, and it had urgency because there was so many drastic and dramatic things happening around this terror attack. Now, GoFundMe, I took a look at some of the information on their site, and they give this explanation as to what types of donations can be given through GoFundMe. Basically, donations to a GoFundMe personal campaign are generally considered to be personal gifts and are not guaranteed to be tax deductible. You can always check with a tax professional, of course, they say. You have the little disclaimer there. Only donations made to a GoFundMe certified charity, you can see that right here, campaign are guaranteed to be sent directly to a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. Now, at that time, I visited the Pulse Victims Fund on GoFundMe, and it had, as you would expect, all of, because in Florida we have very strict regulations, that there are certain state disclaimers that we all must include on any fundraising materials. So when you went to look at the Pulse Victims GoFundMe page at the time, you found all of Equality Florida's contact information, all of their state solicitation registration of materials. But what I couldn't find was any sort of certified charity marker that told me that the gifts were in fact going to that charity. So I emailed GoFundMe customer support, and what they told me is this, that although run by Equality Florida, this campaign is a personal campaign as opposed to a certified charity campaign. So I went back and I talked to Ida, and basically what she said was, and it makes sense, I'm sure this has happened to a lot of organizations who deal with disaster or episodic fundraising, that things move really fast after an emergency or a disaster. And she posted the GoFundMe page within the first 24 hours, and it was just in her name. So it was a personal page, even though she was the development director for Equality Florida. So what they did to make sure that everything was copacetic was, even though it was specifically in her name, they put all of the verifications from Equality Florida on that site so that donors could feel secure that the money was going to the right place. Now, at that time, soon after the attack, like I said, the Equality Florida put up their GoFundMe page, I believe, within 24 hours. The city of Orlando created a OneOrlando Fund. There's a lot of things were happening at the time, but the city of Orlando realized that it was going to be very hard to account for the money in a very transparent way that satisfied all the donors and all of basically the community. The country was looking at this huge fundraising response to see how the charities were going to handle it. So very smartly, a number of the groups got together and created one main fund that was then distributed through the Central Florida Foundation. And what they did is they brought in somebody from the National Center for Victims of Crimes who has on many occasions before distributed donation money or remuneration funds to victims of crime. So he had experience and expertise in that. So they then funneled everything that came in through the GoFundMe site for Equality Florida, everything that came to the city of Orlando, all into one fund, all then distributed by somebody who had expertise in that area. And by doing that, they very much gained the respect of the donor community, looking in, wanting to see complete transparency and wanting to see what was happening with those dollars. Now, those were not the only campaigns that were started for the victims of the Pulse nightclub attack. There was a New York Daily News article, and it basically said the officially sanctioned Equality Florida raised more than $7 million via GoFundMe, but another $1.3 million went to smaller appeals, mostly set up by people with little or no experience. So let's see, where do I have that article open? At the end of this, I will post a couple article links that you can read, not because you're completely interested in a case study on Equality Florida, but because it shares information on the fact that there were a lot of these other little groups setting up crowdfunding campaigns that potentially did not actually go to any of the survivors of the attack, nor the families of the victims of the attack. Now, Chronicle of Philanthropy reported that they were analyzing the GoFundMe accounts. They found 30 different ones that collectively raised $265,000 in a month. And Chronicle of Philanthropy believed that only half of them seemed like they were for legitimate purposes. For example, there was, does it say it on here? It says it in the full article. There was a gentleman from Bradenton, Florida, who put up a GoFundMe account to ostensibly raise money for the victims of the attack. However, he was the owner of a gun shop that sold quick load magazines for assault rifles. So you can see that his GoFundMe page may not be the one that people would first want to give to, but you can't always tell what's legitimate and what's not because it's not required information on the page. And the Better Business Bureau says that there was basically a deluge of people setting up projects, so that it was basically impossible to vet everyone. And any organization that deals with disaster or emergency fundraising, like American Red Cross or the Salvation Army, can tell you that sometimes things just happen more quickly than what charities are prepared for in those scenarios. And then they just have to sort of do a backstop to make sure that they cover all the bases. Okay, so like we said with the GoFundMe for Equality Florida, GoFundMe gave me the information that said there is a list on there of certified charities. So if you are going to host a crowdfunding campaign for your nonprofit organization, I urge you or suggest to you that you register as a certified charity before you make that campaign go live. And when you're vetting your sites and looking at the different sites and deciding where you want to put it up, just make sure that the one that you do has some sort of mechanism for certifying charities in this way. So what should we as nonprofits do for crowdfunding? Here's the biggest thing that I run into with crowdfunding, because it's a very exciting thing that people are very interested in over the last few years, especially board members and volunteers who want to help There is a version of crowdfunding called Peer-to-Peer, where people can create their own fundraising web page, which is sort of like the American Cancer Society has always done the breast cancer walks, or the cure for the Key to the Cure walks, and people always set up their own page as a walker or runner and raise money through that. That is a form of crowdfunding. So crowdfunding allows your supporters to raise money for you, for your organization, without necessarily any input from the organization. So what I see sometimes happen is that well-meaning crowdfunding projects are basically butting up against an organization's formal fundraising plan. So, for example, you're an organization that works with feral cats, and you have created a development plan with your development committee and approved by your board for the coming year that breaks down the total amount that you have to raise for the year, outlines each category of fundraising activities that you plan to do, and how much each one of them will raise or is expected to raise, so that you can get to that total dollar amount. And doing fundraising plans like that basically helps you not only stay organized but also allocate your resources. So generally, or hopefully for a nonprofit, one of the ways that you fundraise is a major gifts program, where you have a donor who's been giving at certain levels to your organization. You've been building your relationships with them and bringing them in closer to the organization, so that they have started to feel ownership of the success of the organization. And your plan is, with a board member, to go ask that donor for a $50,000 gift in the next 2 weeks. During that time, hopefully not a staffer, but a volunteer or another supporter puts up a crowdfunding or GoFundMe site for your organization, gets everybody really involved, and happens to be friends with that major donor that you are going to solicit, and that donor gives $1,000 to that crowdfunding project that was not approved by you. And therefore, it throws a wrench into your major gift development plans, because you basically just received a $1,000 gift in place of what you were hoping was going to be a $50,000 gift. Now, that can be worked with, of course. A lot of donors will understand that there's a big difference between, a crowdfunding project and a transformational gift. If 50,000 would be transformational for your organization. But you can see what I'm getting at is that you can be cannibalizing your own donors when well-meaning supporters put up crowdfunding pages without your knowledge or without any help in planning. I encountered one organization that I work with that a staff person put up a GoFundMe page as a representative of the organization to raise money for foster children to go to Disney World. The problem with that is it was not her personal account. It was for the nonprofit. In that case, all of the nonprofit disclaimers and all of the the tax acknowledgement letters, all of that should have been a result of that campaign, because the person running it presented themselves as a representative of the organization. So that is one of the big things to keep in mind is, is the crowdfunding campaign, say your organization wants to send 4 doctors to Mexico in September to run a free clinic for 2 weeks. That really is a pretty cool crowdfunding campaign opportunity, because it's something very tangible. People understand doctors going to do free clinics, There is an end time in mind, and you can share stories about the people that they're going to help to really bring it close to people's hearts. So it's a good crowdfunding campaign, but what you need to keep in mind is it run by your organization, or is it run by somebody who is supporting you, and can that donor tell the difference? So if Susie's supporter starts a crowdfunding campaign on her own to help your organization, and people give to it because it has your organization's name in it, does that donor think that it is potentially a tax-deductible donation, when in fact it is not, because it went through that individual, not through your organization? And let me give the disclaimer here that I am not a CPA or a lawyer. So you always want to check with your counsel if you have any questions about how to set up these things. So like I said, setting up as an approved or verified charity is the best way that you as a nonprofit organization can work to control or at least have some oversight of the crowdfunding campaigns. Okay, we talked about peer-to-peer, which was, you know, if you're doing a 5K and you put up your own page to raise money for an organization, that can be a very effective way to do it, but that can also be done in several ways. For example, American Cancer Society, when they do these peer-to-peer, person-to-person fundraising pages, they are on a site that is owned/hosted by American Cancer Society. In other cases where people do it on their own and do it through GoFundMe, then though the person may be running for a charity, it is still a gift directly to that person. And asking yourself if is it the right project or a problem for crowdfunding. This is sort of what I mentioned before about, you know, putting up, we need $1 million this year to keep our doors open. That is not a reasonable project for crowdfunding. It is basically just your yearly budget. And that is where you need to put a development plan into place and really be working all of the different fundraising angles and activities that you identify to get to that goal. You should instead, for crowdfunding, keep projects separate. For example, we have a community foundation in Southwest Florida that has something called Gulf Coast Gives, and you can put small projects up on there, starting at $250, I believe, and it can go up over $1,000. But if it's something like, we need to purchase new bunk beds for a foster care home, and it's going to cost $750. That is the perfect type of project to put in a crowdfunding format like that, because you know, it's tangible. You can put up pictures of the bunk beds after they're up, and people can feel really good about the part that they played in it. And you want to find out if you're reaching the right audience. The example that I just gave of Gulf Coast Gives, because it's run through a community foundation and it's one of their programs, the people that view that crowdfunding site looking for projects that are of interest to them, they're on there already because they expect to be giving a donation. So that is basically the perfect audience for you. Now, if you're somebody who is using GoFundMe and sending out information through your network of peers, your hope is just that you're reaching the right audience. And you know, part of that, let's go back to that, reaching the right audience. If your organization is newer or has been operating in a more traditional way, and you don't have a big social media following on Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or Instagram or any of the other platforms, you're going to likely have an uphill battle in your first maybe few crowdfunding campaigns, because they are because of the nature of them, they are very grassroots. They go from person to person to person to person. So if you only have 50 Facebook followers, the reach is not going to be as far as if you had 1,000 Facebook followers. So you may want to consider doing things that will increase your social media presence. Now, a lot of nonprofits get very mired down in that. They spend a lot of time on their social media, and a lot of time trying to cultivate people on social media at the expense of their standard fundraising activities and at the expense of their building relationships with potential major donors. So, just make sure that your organization is very careful about not expecting online gifts or crowdfunding to take the place of your standard fundraising, unless you are a very young, new, potentially political grassroots organization. In that case, those groups tend more often to be very successful with crowdfunding, because that's sort of the nature of the people that they want to reach. If they're wanting to reach millennials to go out into the community to advocate for a political party, they're going to have a lot of social media followers. If you're a more traditional nonprofit organization, you might have to work a little bit harder to gain social media followers before you do a crowdfunding campaign, just so that you have the right audience to aim at, if that makes sense. So here's something that is good. The Equality Florida originally planned, their original goal was $100,000. And within a day, I believe, or a day or two, they were well past that and upped their goal to $500,000. And then they upped it to $1 million because it just kept going. But, and I do believe that I have it open here. If we, this is GoFundMe. So if we type in here, first thing that comes up is Equality Florida Pulse Victims Fund. If we click on that, it will tell us, there we go, it is no longer accepting donations. And that is very important because some organizations will just keep it going and keep it going. But if you said, as an organization, that you needed $750 for bunk beds, and that's what people gave you, but you kept collecting it until you had $3,000, what then do you do with the difference? Because people, as donors, you can't spend their money on something else other than what they planned on supporting. So you have to be very careful with, not going exponentially further over your goal unless you do some good communication about it. So here is something that I think is very good. Equality Florida, on their GoFundMe page, put up information about what's happened since. On September 27th, the funds, well, granted this is past, but will be dispersed, fulfilling the promise. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need, to use some of this money to, uproot bigotry and fight for equality. So the point is they didn't just take the money and run. They are reporting back to their donor community about what happened since. Now, something good on here that happened is you can see now, inspired by what happened in the aftermath of the Pulse nightclub attack, an anonymous donor offered a $100,000 match to raise for an additional campaign, which is the origin of this here. What they're saying is your money went to help the victims of the tragedy. Now we have a donor who is offering a match so that we can go forward and, use that money for advocacy to keep things like this from happening in the future. So that is the key to any kind of fundraising, and it is the same with crowdfunding, is communication. Tell them what you plan to do, tell them when you're doing it, tell them after it's done, show them pictures, and have transparent accountability of your finances. So crowdfunding, I think, sometimes can feel scary to more established nonprofits or older individuals who that's not the way that they choose to raise funds, but it can be a great resource to add into the activities that you're already doing. So as long as it's planned well, part of your development plan, and and you have to be flexible. If an emergency comes up and you need to do a crowdfunding campaign, just make sure that you're working with your development department or development committee and your CEO to make sure that you do it in a way that doesn't cannibalize gifts in other areas, and being as transparent as possible, because crowdfunding, as unregulated as it is right now, it can leave people with the feeling that they were used or taken because their money didn't go to where they expected it to go. So if you are the charity that is going to run a crowdfunding campaign, I just urge you to put it all out there as transparently as possible, share all the information you can so that you have a successful crowdfunding campaign that had a reasonable goal, it had good reach, had good communication, and transparent accounting. And if you have all of those things, you should be able to add crowdfunding as a very effective addition to your development plan and to your development activities throughout the year. So that is the end of what I have today. I do have 2 links that I can share by email later if you would like, to a couple different articles that sort of outline some of the things that we were talking about in terms of making sure that your crowdfunding is set up in the appropriate way so that you gain the trust of your donors and keep the trust of your donors and don't end up in an accidental expose on your organization because you well-meaningly, mistakenly set up a crowdfunding campaign in a way that was not what the donors were expecting. So thank you very much for joining us today. Again, I'm Tracy Vanderneck with Philcom, and if you want links, we can certainly send those to you after the presentation. Thanks very much.